thinking happy Thursday. But it is Tuesday, and happy Tuesday to everybody. I'm Sarah Mastro. I am currently serving as the president of UXPA International, and very excited in particular for this webinar. Jean Rogers and Jean Rogers is from the Screen Time Action Network, and I have been speaking for about 3 years about doing some sort of collaborative effort as we think that designing for children in mind is a super important topic. Very, very relevant. And we're very excited that we can actually have this come to fruition now. And we're very excited for this webinar. We're joined today by Jean Rogers from the Screen Time Action Network at Fair Play, and then Josh Golan as well, who is the executive director at Fair Play. And before I hand it over to them to introduce themselves and give you a little more detail about them, I just wanted to sort of talk about this session. We're going to have an amazing presentation, and then we ask that there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I think it's at the bottom. And we ask that as Jean and Josh are presenting, if you have any questions, please feel free to put all the questions in the Q&A, and we're going to hold some time at the end for the two of them to answer all of your questions and feedback and all of that. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over the mic to Jean, I believe, who's going to be kicking it off. And we are recording, just so everybody else knows. So if you didn't catch everything, you will have this available to you at a later time. So thank you again, Jean and Josh. I'm super excited for this. So
thank you, Sarah. We're glad to be here. Josh, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sarah, and it's great to be here. I'm Josh Golan, the Executive Director of Fair Play. We are a national advocacy organization. We are committed to building a world where kids can be kids, free from the manipulation of marketers and big tech. And we do a number of things at Fair Play. We do a lot of corporate campaigns aimed at stopping what we see as some of the worst privacy invasions and manipulations of children by tech companies. So for instance, right now we have a big international campaign to stop Facebook from releasing a kids version of Instagram. We actually were able to get Facebook to pause that project at least, and now we're trying to make that pause permanent. We also do a lot of work on policy, and we are a watchdog. So we filed the complaint in 2018 that led to the Federal Trade Commission fining Google $170 million for illegally collecting children's data on YouTube. And increasingly, we have been focused on legislation and changing the rules so that children can grow up with the websites and the apps and the media environment that they deserve. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that lately. We also have one of the smartest things I ever did was several years ago, I hired Jean Rogers to start our action network, our Screen Time Action Network, and she will tell you a little bit more about that, what that is, and then we'll launch into the presentation.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. So happy to be here. I'm Jean Rogers, Director of the Children's Screen Time Action Network at Fair Play, and we're a global collaborative community of practitioners, educators, advocates, and parents working to reduce excessive and harmful screen use in childhood. We produce webinars as well on a wide range of topics related to children's screen time. We have 7 work groups that collaborate on resources and advocacy around topics like screens in schools, early childhood, mental health, cyberbullying, and online safety. And the work groups are where people who want to get more involved roll up their sleeves and do something with regards to what we know in the research to make the world a safer, online world a safer place for children and their families. And we also have a fantastic resource library that we invite you all to visit and download free resources from. We're at screentimenetwork.org. So that's who we are. And who are you? We understand that you're members of this professional association with experience in various areas of research and design. You're strategists, analysts, designers, and many of you are parents and aunts and uncles and neighbors who want safe and healthy experiences for your own children and other children online. And so we look forward to answering your questions after this presentation. So no one would argue, I think, that children are using apps now well before they can read or even speak. Today, we'll be giving you a broad understanding of the critical developmental milestones that require consideration when designing for children. And we'll also explore the vulnerabilities that are often exploited in children's tech. Why? Because child development and well-being are not the driving forces in most design decisions. So we'll discuss the age-appropriate design code that is being implemented right now in the UK and other countries and introduced in some states in the US as well. We'll talk about how those considerations might be implemented in your work and in our work, and how going forward, there might be a greater understanding between developers and organizations like ours who are focused on the well-being of children and their families. So also, I don't think we would argue that parenting has become harder since the arrival of digital devices, artificial intelligence, social media. This Pew study indicates that 2/3 of US parents are calling it out. They're calling it by name. They're saying that social media and smartphones technology has made their job a lot harder. So why is it harder? Well, let's dive in for a minute. With in-person and unplugged school and socializing, parents had fewer environments that they had to monitor and approve. The online world creates multiple environments that parents have to keep track of and that kids live in. Environments like their curriculum, like games, like social media. And much of it overlaps, for instance, a Facebook group for the debate club or the gamified math curriculum, Prodigy. Those are just a couple of those overlapping environments. In 2018, advertisers spent $4.2 billion worldwide to target children. That expenditure is forecast to be $4.6 billion this year in 2022. It makes it harder for parents to raise children by their own values when these corporate-driven interests are targeting kids. And we know it takes effort to learn and implement digital wellness in families. Some families that follow us have been doing it for a long time, but it can be extra hard during the current unprecedented challenges that face most families today. Economic challenges, social challenges. Some of the problems that we see in our work every day stem from childhood tech. When young children have more time on screens, they may develop attachment disorders. So for children to feel safe and secure, it's so important for them to have one-on-one eye contact by responsive, loving adults. Speech and language disorders can result from less verbal communication. So when parents and kids are all on their devices, glued to their different screens, they're not looking at each other. They're not talking as much. They're not narrating what they do during the day. As kids get older and spending more time on curated content of social media, they're seeing the digital highlight reels, the comparison culture that all lead to social isolation, depression, and even suicidal thoughts and behavior. Algorithms can take them down a path of eating disorders and further self-harm. Even at lower levels of distress, teens are unable to make that eye contact, cooperate on a team, problem solve. These are issues that employers are citing now when young adults are applying for their jobs. So believe it or not, we're not here to say kids should be unplugged altogether. Our hope is that a greater understanding of child development and children's innate needs will help you create products that fundamentally allow these needs to be met while minimizing the harms. So today I'll be citing the work of two developmental theorists, Erik Erikson and Jean Piaget. This wheel here depicts Erikson's stage theory of development. So it's a womb to tomb theory of social emotional development. Erikson theorized that each stage has a conflict and a positive or negative developmental outcome depending on the resolution of that conflict. Combined with Piaget's theory of cognitive development, these two models help us understand what children uniquely need at each stage and for their positive social, emotional, and cognitive development. So in Piaget's theory, there are 4 stages of meaning making in a child's brain development: sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. At each stage, the child has unique needs, and when those needs are fulfilled, they achieve the goal of that stage. As I break these stages down, I'll get into the needs and the goals for each stage, and we'll see how when those needs are not provided for or they're interrupted by too much tech, then we have developmental delays. So in the first stage of cognitive development, sensory motor, taking place between birth and 24 months, it's easy to remember this stage because kids are experiencing the world completely through their senses. They don't understand yet that a picture can stand for something else. They don't understand that if a teddy bear is not in the room, it still exists. They're just seeing what's in front of them, feeling what's in front of them, smelling what's in front of them. They need to touch things, bang things, put everything in their mouth. Their brains are developing at the fastest rate in their whole lives at this time. Toward the end of this stage, they begin to understand object permanence. And that's the knowledge that something still exists even when you don't see them. It's why Peekaboo is a great game to play with kids at this stage. And they see their parents and siblings doing things that they want to mimic. They see you tapping your cell phone, they will want to do the same. So it seems like that cell phone might just be a block to them. It could be just a block to them. They could be just tapping it the way they see their parents tapping it. But they need items with texture. They need to develop their senses with all different kinds of sensory play. Finding their toes is an exploration and an accomplishment. It uses their whole body, and it helps them when they discover parts of their body and where they are in the world to say, I'm here, I'm part of this world. The AAP recommends, American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no screen time during this stage, except for video chats with relatives. Every 30 minutes of screen use for infants increases their risk of speech delay in children 6 months to 2 years by almost 50%. In Piaget's second stage, the pre-operational stage, children have rapid growth in their speech, their memory, and their make-believe worlds, which are critical to forming more complex thinking. They continue to put together information from screens and the real world to shape their personalities and their perspective. They naturally focus on the most dramatic and concrete aspects of any situation, whether that's a book, a game, or people talking in a room with them. They think in dichotomous categories at this stage of win or lose, good or bad. They don't understand any gray areas in between. And toward the end of this period, they begin to understand that when that teddy bear is out of the room, it still exists, or that a heart shape means I love you. In the next stage, concrete operational, that's where children are developing logic and understanding symbols and starting to build compassion and empathy skills. It's a stage where they start using logical principles to solve problems, understand size, distance, cause and effect. This child can understand that the same amount of liquid is in both glasses and also understand why. At this stage, child-directed creative play provides the stage for problem solving, trying things out, building, drawing, dramatic vignettes, all that provide opportunities for social and physical exploration. Most apps and games are not built with consequences that track real life lessons at this stage. Building on an app, for example, doesn't require weighting items for balance. pieces falling over, and the failure that must occur to allow a child to problem solve. Each child understands situations in their own unique way. I'm going to repeat that sentence because it's so important for us to understand. Each child understands situations in their own unique way. Asking them lots of questions about what they see, whether in screens or in life, helps them to understand what they're thinking. So this is a big reason why the American Academy of Pediatrics will tell parents to co-view and co-play anything that kids are doing at this stage, so they can talk about it and help them understand it. By learning what they're thinking, we can scaffold their play in the direction of our values and foster healthy decision-making that will serve them in their teen years. At this stage, children can begin to understand what screen content is healthy, video chats with friends and family, as I mentioned before, and which can be harmful, like violent or scary content. By repeating these messages and using parental controls, we begin to create that safe digital environment. And in the final stage of Piaget's cognitive development, this is the formal operational stage. At this stage, children are capable of full abstract thinking and maintaining complex relationships with their family and friends. It begins around 12 years old and continues into adulthood. Kids in this stage are capable of deductive logic, hypothetical reasoning, and very keen observations, sometimes too keen. They use trial and error to systematically solve problems, and the goal at this stage is full abstract understanding. So it's very easy to think of teens as adults, especially when they're taller and bigger than we are, but they still have important developmental needs. The need for physical activity, except for in infancy, early adolescence is the most rapid period of physical growth in childhood. These children need to exercise and to develop their growing bodies. That's why sports is so popular at this age. Physical activity should include opportunities for developing both large and small muscles at this stage. They need competence, they need the feeling of achievement. And it's common for young adolescents to feel self-conscious and unsure of their abilities during this rapid growth stage. And they need lots of opportunities to demonstrate to themselves and to others that they can do things well. They need self-definition. Rapidly growing children need lots of opportunities to explore who and what they're becoming and how they relate to the world around them as a member of their sex, race, family, culture, community. They need opportunities to explore a wide variety of roles, probably trying on roles and trying on careers as they begin to look at what their future might hold. They need creative expression. Their bodies and minds are rapidly growing and changing and becoming more involved in the world beyond the home and family. This is where I say they naturally separate from parents, and it's really important to have other adults that share your values in their lives. They need opportunities to speak, to write, to dance, to sing, to express themselves in artistic ways. They also need structure and clear limits, which sometimes it's hard to remember that they still need these. As older children grow, their need for independence and freedom, is easy to see, but their need for limits is not easy to see. They still appreciate those guidelines from family and school, and they need meaningful participation. So the Center for Early Adolescence stresses that older children need to participate in activities that shape their own lives. So that is, they need opportunities to develop new talents and skills and in the context of the real world. And now I'll pass the mic to Josh, who will take us through some design issues that harm children and inspiration for designing with kids in mind.
Thank you, Jean. Can you stop
Yes.
the screen share so I can?
I shall.
1 second. So what does it mean to design with kids in mind? If you only remember a couple of things from this, I hope you will remember this. First of all, it's about making the best interests of children a primary design consideration. That is the overarching idea of designing with kids in mind. And drilling down a little bit more on that, what does that mean? So Jean just talked a lot about child development and how children experience the world as they grow older. And it means not exploiting those developmental vulnerabilities. Children are vulnerable in different ways as they go through those different stages that Jean was talking about. And tech companies and designers have gotten really good at exploiting those vulnerabilities in order to profit off of children. And that's what part of what we want to see stop. Don't optimize for engagement, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But that is the primary goal of a lot of design on the sites that children are using, is to have kids use a site as much as possible, so you can collect as much data from them as possible, so you can serve them the content that will keep them on even longer, so you can serve them more ads based on all the data that you collected. That is a harmful business model for children, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that. And along with that, avoiding unfair monetization, which is not just advertising, but in-game purchases, and using games to manipulate children into wanting in-game purchases. And also minimizing data collection and how long you keep that data. What goes on in terms of the data collection and how companies are using that is not only frequently a violation of the law, but it's also often putting children at risk and undermining their well-being. So what we're talking about is that the business objectives often conflict with positive outcomes for children. And we can see that through design. So social media companies want to maximize time on their product. So they design to engage users by making content more and more appealing and reducing friction, right? Reducing friction is a huge part of design. And what does that lead to? It leads to children spending too much time online and feeling like it's really hard to stop. Social media companies want to get children to share as much as possible and to extend their networks and connections, and to make as many friends as possible, because those connections and that data sharing and that using that's profitable for the companies. And what that means in practice is that children often have extensive networks with people that they shouldn't have connections with. The number of children that have had a explicit online, 25% of 9 to 17-year-olds report have having an explicit online sexual encounter with somebody who they believe to be an adult online. That's 25% of 9 to 17-year-olds, 9-year-olds. So, and again, that's part of the design. It's part of wanting kids to have as many connections, as many friends, recommending friends, encouraging, sharing as much as possible leads to things like that.
Gosh, I'm going to interrupt you for a minute because
Sure.
you're back on the Piaget slide. I don't know if you know that. You're on my slide, and you need to click the slideshow button as well so that everybody can see the slide better.
Oh, thank you so much, Jean. It is not showing. Okay. Well, that is embarrassing. So give me a second. Okay. So these are the business objectives and how they lead to design strategies that lead to bad outcomes for children. So Jean talked a little bit about the harms of overuse of digital media. So really the harms of maximizing engagement, right? So again, so much of what is done, so much of the way that the platforms, the apps, the websites that children are using they're designed to maximize engagement, to maximize sharing, to maximize posting, to maximize video watching, to maximize content consumption. And excessive use of digital media is linked to physical harms, like obesity and decreased quality of sleep, to mental health harms, like eating disorders, increased depression and anxiety.
It leads to social harms like cyberbullying. So 59% of teens report being bullied on social media. And the pressure to spend more time on digital media platforms and maximize interactions with other users also puts children at risk from predation, as I was just mentioning. And you know, I think there's two things that are at work here. One is the content that children are exposed to, and one is the displacement. So the more that you are on social media, technology has come an incredible way, but we have not figured out how to create more than 24 hours in a day. So if teens are spending 7 hours of a day on entertainment screen media, that's 7 hours a day, not including schoolwork, homework, that doesn't leave a lot of time for things like face-to-face interaction, physical exercise, sleep, and those things you get less of when you're on a screen that much. The other harm that comes from maximizing engagement is when your goal is to keep kids on your platform as long as possible. One of the main things that you do is to serve them the content that is most likely to keep them on that screen longer. And you know, this is for a quote from a former YouTube engineer who talks about the fact that when he worked at YouTube, the considerations for the algorithm were not whether the content was going to be good for kids, not whether the content was going to be safe for kids, but only was the main consideration was to maximize watch time. I think many of us know on YouTube, there has been a huge problem over the past several years where the algorithm was recommending fake cartoons that would start out looking like a regular Peppa Pig cartoon and then would quickly morph into something really scary or violent or sexual. That's part of this problem. It's a part of the problem of when you maximize for engagement, you're agnostic about the content that you're showing for kids. Kids need good quality curated content. That's not what they get online. They get algorithmically driven content that is designed to tap into their interests, their developmental vulnerabilities to keep them watching longer and longer. Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, I think put it really nicely when talking about Instagram. So Instagram shows teenagers the content that is most likely to keep them engaged based on what all the information that Instagram collects about them and what they've identified to be their interests. And it will do that even if the young person's interests are in self-harm or eating disorders or other harmful behaviors. That's the content that they're going to see. And the more they look at that content, the more they're going to get that content. So Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, said, in the case of things like teens and things like self-harm, they develop these feedback loops, whereas children are using Instagram to self-soothe, but then they are exposed to more content that makes them hate themselves. This isn't a thing where we can say that 80% of kids are okay. We need to say, what can we do to save all kids? And I think that last point is really, really important, because for many kids, they will be fine with how much they're using this stuff, or they'll be able to moderate their use. And for some kids, there will be small effects that can accumulate over time. And for some kids, we will see really the most severe harms, things like suicidal ideation, eating disorders, self-harm, participating in really dangerous challenges that can lead to injury and death. And we need to be considerate of all of those things, you know, and we can't just say, well, my kid isn't committing suicide or thinking about suicide or eating, starving themselves. We need to be thinking about all those kids and that smaller subgroup that is having the worst effects from this stuff. Jean talked about early childhood. One of the markers of early childhood is that children form really strong attachments to characters. You know, early childhood is a time of a lot of change, and these characters can be really comforting. They have relationships where they feel like they have a real relationship with a character. If you know, I'm sure if you have young children in your lives, you've seen this with, you know, iconic characters like Shrek or Peppa Pig. And one of the things that we see online is taking those parasocial relationships that children have with characters and exploiting them. So this is from an app for young children, this graphic here, where the character wants you to make an in-game purchase, buy something for this character. And so you are taken to the App Store, and then if you do not purchase something for this character. When you come back to the game, the character is crying. So the character is crying because children are not able to convince their parents to buy something for them. And to think about, using design to deliberately make a young child feel like they are hurting a friend. I think that shows you really the extreme lengths that monetization can take us with design and the type of thing that we absolutely want to avoid. With older children, there's so much that goes into leveraging FOMO, push alerts that say your friend just posted this thing on Instagram, go check it out, nudges in order to post more and share more, gamifying children's relationships. One of the things we hear from parents all the time is about snap streaks, where children try and keep a streak going by communicating with the same friend every day. And this is a brilliant design choice from an engagement standpoint. Snapchat has figured out how to keep kids wanting to keep these streaks going. It doesn't cost Snap anything, right? This isn't a real reward. It's just a fake virtual reward. But these are so powerful. We hear from parents when they're going on vacations that kids have meltdowns, that they can't bring their phones, and how are they going to keep their Snap streaks going? So again, these are things leveraging the fact that those relationships are so important to a preteen and to a teenager, and using that for the purposes of the site, not for the benefit of the child. Quantifying popularity is one of the trademarks of social media that we see, right? Everything that I do or say on social media is immediately quantified and given a popularity score in the form of likes and shares and retweets, as well as ourselves, right? So I can look at Jean and say, oh my gosh, she has so many more quote unquote friends than I do. Why is that? What can I do to get as many friends as Jean? And if we think about it from the standpoint of what is good for children, what is good for teens, I don't know hardly anybody who would say we want to recreate the high school cafeteria where we can instantly tell who the cool kids are and who the popular kids are and who are the unpopular kids. But that's what we do on social media 24/7. And it's not just that it makes kids feel bad about themselves because they're constantly doing this social comparison. Kids also are smart. They understand what is going to get them those likes and those shares. They understand that it is risque and provocative content that gets that reaction. And so we see, teen girls reporting that they feel this enormous pressure to post sexualized selfies, and so that's part of what's so concerning about the quantification of popularity as well. I want to talk a little bit about advertising because obviously monetization is a big piece of this, and advertising is one of the major ways that kids are monetized. Until children reach around the age of 8, when they leave that pre-operational stage that Jean was talking about before, they don't tend to understand persuasive intent. What that means is when you and I see an advertisement, we understand the advertisement might be effective on us, but at least we understand that the purpose of that advertisement is to try and persuade us to want something or to think in a certain way. And that's the defense that we have against it. We discount that information. Younger children don't do that. They treat the information that they get in an advertisement as the same as if it came from a teacher or a parent or some other trusted adult. So it's just fundamentally unfair to advertise at all to a younger child. As children get older, they begin to understand our advertising, but it really depends on what the advertising is. So two of the predominant ways that we see online advertising in the digital world are one, we see advertising that's completely embedded. So one of the things, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, we also see data-driven advertising. Advertising that is targeted to children based on all of this information that is collected about them. By the time a child is 13, it is estimated that advertisers will have 72 million data points about them. And one of the things that allows companies to do is to market to children's vulnerability. So a couple of years ago, a memo was leaked from Facebook where Facebook was bragging to advertisers that they could target children at the exact moment that they were feeling bad about themselves, including feeling bad about their bodies. So all of this data makes advertising even more pernicious. It makes it, allows you advertisers to really target an audience of one in a way that can be really detrimental to young people. I mentioned how advertising is increasingly embedded on the internet. Think about influencers. The whole idea of an influencer is that the advertising isn't separate. It's not, we'll be right back after these messages. It's that the content that kids are consuming is an actual advertisement. One of the things that's interesting is on children's television, you're not allowed to have product placement. You're not allowed to have a host selling directly to a child, but we don't have those same regulations on the internet. And so one of the things we see on YouTube, for instance, is the most popular genre for younger kids are these unboxing videos where toy companies pay children and their families in order to talk about videos and to talk about toys really excitedly. And the kids who are watching these videos, they feel like they're watching a friend talk about a toy. They don't understand that this young child has been paid by Target and paid by Star Wars in order to make this video. The other way that kids are unfairly monetized on the internet is through in-game purchases. The thing about in-game purchases is that they always affect design. If that's your monetization strategy, you are going to do everything you can in order to drive in-game purchases. It is just frankly more ethical and more fair to children and families to have a pay one price game than to constantly barrage kids and push them to want add-ons. So what we see is that kids are teased incessantly during these games. They are shown things that they would want to play with. Like for instance, in this Strawberry Shortcake Puppy Palace, they only can play with one puppy, and to play with the other puppies, these adorable puppies, they have to pay to play with those. And the game on the left, which is actually a game called Prodigy, which is used by tens of thousands of schools across the country, kids see a treasure chest, and if they click on the treasure chest, it says, ask your parents about buying a subscription to Prodigy. And so that you can see what's inside this treasure chest. So there's this constant teasing of what's inside, what the prizes that you could access, but you can't get them unless you fork over money. And so that becomes a way, another harmful way of monetizing. Virtual currencies go along with the monetization, with the in-game purchases. Currencies are already an abstraction, right? A dollar bill is an abstraction. It only has value because we assign it value. Well, virtual currencies confuse kids even more, especially because they don't frequently they don't have fixed values. So if you buy more currency, it's worth less. I mean, imagine a 10-year-old trying to figure out how much their V-Bucks are actually worth by looking at this. And then consider the fact that when you spend your virtual currency, it's also often manipulated so that you have a little bit of virtual currency left over that you can't spend on anything unless you buy more V-Bucks. And so virtual currency is another way of unfairly monetizing children. The last thing I'll say before I get to design code is that we also see all of these data abuses in the ecosystem for children. Oh, that is not the right slide. So I'll I will say, got the presentations a little mixed up here, but so a couple things about data abuses. First of all, you are not supposed to collect data from a child under the age of 13 without getting parental permission because of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. But in fact, 50% of the apps in Google Play for children under the age of 13 are illegally collecting children's data. The other thing that I would say is that we see all the time that companies collect data and then they keep it as long as they can unless there is that odd parent that asks them to delete that data. And when in fact the law says if you are collecting data from a child under the age of 13, you can only use it for as long as you need it for the original purpose it was collected. I know that data is valuable, and one thing that we do with that apps do is they collect as much data as possible because there might be some way to monetize it later. But that's not actually what the law says, and that's not actually fair to children, because every time you collect more and more data and more people have access to it, that creates risk for children. And then we see things like where data that never needed to be collected is collected, like Why do flashlights collect GPS, right? That so many apps for children are collecting GPS. That is obviously highly sensitive information. There's no reason to collect GPS unless you're doing something like a treasure hunt or that involves moving around the world. And yet we see that all the time. And the last thing I'll say about data is that even though there's no law around what you can collect from teens, COPPA only goes up through age 12. Teens absolutely deserve privacy protections as well. So what is a design code? So in the UK, they recently adopted something called the Age Appropriate Design Code. It's an upstream approach that requires making the best interests of children a primary consideration when designing an online service likely to be accessed by children. There's all sorts of things that go into making it, to doing that. It's a way of requiring companies to design their service in a way of reducing risk. So things like putting your most protective settings on by default, rather than making a parent go through 400 hoops in order to find how they can make an account private or make it on the most protective setting, put it on the most protective setting. And if the parent wants to go through the hoops to make it to protect their child less, that's fine, but at least start from the most protective point. And the key point is that it shouldn't be up to the companies to decide whether they want to make risky choices or not. We should mandate it. Here in the United States, we are leading a big campaign for a design code in the US like they've done in the UK. We have legislation in Congress that would do a number of things to curb these design abuses I've been talking to expand privacy protections to teens, to ban data-driven advertising to anybody under the age of 18, to require platforms to do regular risk assessments so they're understanding what their data processing, what that's doing from a developmental standpoint to children. Because if you don't understand how your data processing is impacting children, you shouldn't be processing children's data. About getting rid of those frictionless things that lead to overuse and make it harder for children to disconnect, things like autoplay and nudges and rewards for increased engagement. No displays of quantified popularity. Let's get rid of the high school cafeteria that I talked about earlier, and prohibiting the amplification of harmful content. So the Kids Act would do that, because kids are being exposed to so much online right now, and a lot of it is not because they're looking for it. It's because that's what's being recommended to them, because of, again, the idea is to maximize engagement, and if it's harmful content that's going to keep a kid online, that's what is being served to them. So I will close by just saying, we are working really hard to get this legislation, to get policies passed. I should also mention that California has a bill that would create a design code in the state of California, which is very much modeled on the bill they have in the UK. But we know that the legislation is hard work, and it may take a little bit of time. And so we hope that developers will take these principles to heart, will take these as ideas for how to design to support children's development rather than exploiting it in the meantime. And we invite you to dialogue with us. We invite you to learn, to tell us about, confidentially if you like, about your struggles to get people to think about things other than maximizing engagement and maximizing profits, because ultimately we need to change the way that apps and websites and platforms are designed to create the online environment that children really need. And Jean, I don't know if you have any final thoughts before we turn it over to questions.
I just want to say, to reinforce what Josh said about, we would love to be in dialogue with you. We would love to have you join the Action Network. Take a look at our resource library at screentimenetwork.org. And we appreciate you giving us this opportunity.
Thank you so much. This is so interesting and so terrifying all at the same time.
Yeah.
For a lot of us. There are a few questions. I'll start. There's one from at the top. Is it the tech itself that causes delays, or the experiences the tech is replacing?
So I'll jump in first, and then I'll let Josh comment as well. But This is what we call displacement. So the displacement is it's actually both, I'll say. But with the displacement, when those developmental milestones are missed, there are ways they can be caught up with later in life, but it's not easy. And so the displacement is very important. But I also think that I'm also a certified parent educator. And one of the things I tell parents is to look for content online that helps kids get offline. So for instance, during the pandemic, we had kids who learned how to cook. We had kids who learned how to do things like teach your dog to roll over. So when they're doing something that then they can take into the real world, it's a great use of that online time, and then they get off to do it. So it's not keeping them hooked and keeping them staying there. Josh, do you have any other additions to that one?
I mean, I think I think the research, a lot of the research doesn't tell us yet whether it's the content or whether it's the displacement, but I think we all suspect that displacement is a huge piece of it. There's a lot of evidence that children who spend more time on screens, understandably, because again, there's only 24 hours in a day, spend less time like doing things like in hands-on creative play, things that are essential, things that have proven child development benefits. So I think that's part of it. But I would imagine that part of it is also the content. But I would caution, guys, I think a lot of times what people think is if we can replace the bad content with good content, then we will solve all of the problems. And that it's important to replace the bad content with good content, but we also need kids to spend less time on this stuff as well. And so that's why we need to design it in a way that makes it easier to disconnect than keep going. It is so, I mean, I didn't even talk about things like autoplay and endless scroll, right? But if you were thinking about a video platform for young children that actually was built for their benefit, like it would show one video and then the screen would go black, right? And there would be nothing. So the child would have to find something else to do. But of course, that's not what happens on YouTube. What happens on YouTube is there's 15 videos teed up that have been specifically selected because those are going to be the ones that child wants to watch.
Great. Our next question is from Elise. Does the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act apply to home use medical devices that are web connected and sending data to the cloud for medical purposes? I could not see a concrete answer on the website.
Yes, it does, though, depending on what the device is, right? That also gets you into things like HIPAA, and I am not a HIPAA expert or an expert on the intersection of HIPAA and COPPA. But if you have a medical device that is web connected and is collecting data from a child under the age of 13, then COPPA applies, and you would need to get parental permission for collecting that data, and all of the limitations on how you could use that data that are in COPPA would apply.
And she had a follow-up comment. Thank you for the shout out for the age appropriate design code in the UK. Have not seen that before. Can you recommend any other resources for designing medical devices for children and teenagers? Also great content on developmental stages. That was very helpful.
I don't know that I have resources specifically for medical devices, but I would say I showed a couple of slides from the Pathways report put out by the Five Rights Organization, which is an organization that was actually responsible for the UK's age-appropriate design code, which is an incredibly useful report in looking at things like how different design techniques affect children at different stages, and what thinking about positive design and how you want to avoid some of those pitfalls.
Great. And Stacy asked, any recommendations for companies who are making apps for children to use in the school where it is fully for educational purposes without any advertisement and without any purchase opportunities?
I'm just going to say we see the bad stuff. So I just made a note to do some research on that. I do not. Josh, do you?
Well, I think there's a couple things. I mean, first of all, I think the part of the answer is in the question, right? So number one thing is is don't monetize children if you're going to create an app that you're going to be using as an educational setting. And so one of the campaigns that we have going right now is against a math app called Prodigy, which I mentioned before, which is an app that is used in over 90,000 schools. I think was the last number I saw. And schools get it for free, and then teachers encourage kids to play it at home. And when they go home, they are barraged with advertisements to buy a $120 subscription. And then to make things worse, if they get that subscription, when they go back into the classroom, they have advantages over the children whose parents can't afford that subscription. And you can actually see who's getting all the cool stuff in the game and who's not. So avoiding that monetization of children, avoiding advertising, I think would be at the top of my list. But I would also, for me, I think, educational apps and programs that do a couple of things. First of all, avoiding gamification as much as you can. I know that there is a trend, right? Because kids love video games. So let's make everything like a video game. But when we do that, we don't give kids the diversity of experiences that they really need and the diversity of learning styles and pedagogies that they need. And so I think it's, the easiest thing to do is to make things like a video game and create a virtual world and create a virtual store and incentivize kids to want to go to the virtual store. But ultimately, we want kids to learn for the love of learning. And there's a lot of evidence that when you rely on those external rewards, that what you do is you teach kids to love external rewards. You don't teach them to love learning. And so I think avoiding the virtual store, avoiding the gamification as much as you can. The other thing I would say is that from, the educational experts that I talk to say the best educational programs and apps are those that have an offline component, so that are using the power of the internet to show kids things that they couldn't see otherwise, or to attempt things that they couldn't do otherwise. I mean, there are places you can visit that I couldn't have dreamed of when I was in school. We could only go on a field trip like in a mile radius from our school. There wasn't going to the Great Barrier Reef on the internet or things like that. So there's all these things that you can do online, but having an offline component, not keeping kids online, having them go to do the things that need to be online and then coming back offline, I think I think that's the best, because as Jean said, particularly before kids, when they're in those earlier stages, learning with the hands-on, learning using all their senses is really important. Learning by talking to the kid next to them and seeing what they're doing. When we're all on our own screen as kids and in a classroom, we don't have that same experience. And so I think, if those would be my wish list for educational designers.
I'm going to jump ahead. There was one question, I think you kind of answered it, about, is gamification okay as long as it's rewarding positive behavior?
I mean, that's a really tricky one, right? I mean, it's certainly better than rewarding negative behavior, but I think the problem that we're seeing is that the more we gamify, the harder it is to motivate kids without gamification. And so there's like an arms race to gamify, right? And somebody's got to de-escalate that arms race. So as long as we're constantly telling kids that the reason to do your math homework is because it's a game and you're going to get an external reward, we're not teaching kids to love math because math is really cool and allows you to figure out all these really neat things about the world. And so, I know there are some people that wouldn't agree with me, but a lot of the educational theorists that I follow really think that what we're doing right now is we're training kids to always be dependent on those external rewards. And I think obviously there's always been things like stickers and teachers giving out little knickknacks and things like this, but the power of gamification and virtual stores and having your own virtual character that you buy stuff for makes it, I think, all the more powerful and concerning. And so, I think the more we can avoid gamification, the better.
And it displaces that desire to have that internal motivation. We want them to have intrinsic motivation. And like Josh said, the love for learning. So
I think that was kind of, if we should avoid maximizing for engagement, how might we design an educational app that is meant to engage a child in learning?
I think we'd be happy to share a slide deck, and taking a look at those developmental stages and implementing some pieces in the design. I don't know what's possible, obviously, but that have, like in the concrete operational stage, for example, using symbols, using things that help kids understand there's a volume to this, sort of mimicking what they need in the real world in the app might be possible.
And I would add that I think that there's a difference between creating engaging content and using design techniques and using A/B testing in order to drive engagement. So, if my daughter is watching a movie and she doesn't want to turn it off because it's a really compelling movie, or she's lost in a book because it's a really compelling book, that's different than if YouTube is suggesting a video to her one after the other for her to keep watching, or if it's easier for her to pull and refresh than to muster the energy to shut that app off and to turn it off. So I think that there's a difference between compelling content and design features which drive engagement. And to me, like the design features are like the cheap hack, like they're the way to hack human psychology or children's development, and in order to further your goals. Where creating something that's really engaging, that's harder, but that's different. Like the kid is having a deeper relationship with that content than it's just because, oh, it's just so easy to keep doing this. I think that those are two different things.
And then incentivization is one of the behavior change techniques to promote health behaviors and commonly used in digital health behavior change interventions. What can be the good incentivization strategies to promote health behaviors through digital environments?
I would say that I'm not sure about the incentivization, but I would say what we want is more friction. I mean, a lot of what we want is more friction. It is to make children make a conscious choice to want to keep going. Make their, and if they're younger, with their parents' buy-in. But what we have right now is, by removing all of the friction, by making it so easy to stay on YouTube or to get lost on TikTok, or to play that same app game 4,000 times in a row. So I think that's part of what this has to be about is, the goal of frictionless does not serve children. We want children to work. We want them to experience that friction so that it's harder for them. And right now what we're doing is we're reducing that, so make it so the easiest default thing is just to stay like this.
And our last question was actually a comment, if Stacy's still here, from Kim, that Kim's kids in elementary school use Dreambox and Lexia at their school. She doesn't recall any ads or upsells in either of those. Dreambox sends "congrats, you did X" email to parents, and Lexia has certificates the teacher prints out when they reach a milestone.
Yeah, as long as the teacher is still primary, that sounds interesting. That sounds like probably a more appropriate online curriculum. But we also want to really focus on the importance of that teacher-child relationship in the learning process.
Well, that cleared out our Q&A box, and I think it's right at 6. So thank you so much, Jean and Josh, for the webinar today. It was really great. For anybody attending, we'll have the recording up on our website tomorrow in our webinar library. And please let us know any feedback you have about this webinar or others, or anything else you'd like to see. And again, thanks, Josh and Jean, for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye.